Today, Stephen Harper gave a campaign-style speech in Ottawa. I think it's probably going to be the template for the theme of his election campaign. As you know, Canada now has fixed election dates, and barring a parliamentary crisis, Canadians should go to the polls on October 19th of next year. That's just 13 months from now. Harper talked about the economy and job creation in Canada, about the dozens of free trade deals he's signed with other countries. He talked about criminal justice reform. I mean, these are good conservative staples. But there was something new and interesting about his stump speech today. With the exception of the economy, Harper spent more time on foreign affairs than anything else. That's new, but it represents the state of the world today. As I told you last week, the NBC Wall Street Journal poll says the beheading of Americans by that terrorist group called the Islamic State has become the most followed news story in America in 5 years. Canadians are just as gripped by these terrible developments and by Vladimir Putin's attempt to resurrect a Soviet empire. Harper has been a leader on these issues, and he clearly wants it to be something Canadians consider at the next election. Here, listen to 3 excerpts from his speech today.
Canadians have wanted us to pursue a foreign policy that is rooted in protecting our interests and projecting our values. Not, as our critics have long advocated, to just go along and to get along on the international stage. You know, we were told for years by some of them to just ignore the erosion of freedoms and the growing hostility from Putin's Russia. After all, the Cold War was over. Over, except, of course, in the mind of Mr. Putin. Finally, the world is waking up.
That's exactly right. But if you listen to, say, the NDP, they've always been the party of peace at all costs, of appeasement, of utopia, where we should replace our Department of Defense with a Department of Peace. During the Cold War, they actually wanted to abandon NATO. They see no evil in the world. They have abolished the idea of good and evil. They would abolish the idea of war, even if our enemies still believe in it. It's a childish idea, like many socialist dreams, but they have no chance of forming government, do they? But the Liberal Party has been worse in some ways than the NDP. They do believe in evil, I think. They know it exists, I think. But their solution, in a perfectly liberal way, is to split the difference between good and evil. To think that Canadians don't choose sides between good and evil, as if we didn't take sides in the First or Second World Wars or Korea, or didn't take the good side on the divide of the Cold War between NATO and the Warsaw Pact. The Liberals historically, especially under Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, thought Canada should be in the middle somewhere, splitting the difference between Russian, Chinese, and Cuban dictators versus free democracies, as if both sides were equally moral. Enough from me. Here's more from Harper's speech.
And since the Putin regime invaded Ukraine, we have been leading the way in seeking the political and economic isolation of Russia. We've shipped non-lethal military supplies to help the Ukrainian government. We're providing financial assistance, and we've deployed the Canadian Armed Forces to help reassure our NATO allies in Eastern Europe. And let me tell you, in the councils of the world, there is no ambiguity as to where Canada stands. And when we have President Poroshenko in our parliament this week, we will be able to tell him that we will not rest until the people of Ukraine are free to choose their own destiny, free from Russian boots on their soil, free from intimidation. We will never recognize the illegal occupation of Crimea nor any other inch of Ukraine's sovereign territory.
That's pretty powerful. That's not splitting the difference between good and evil. That's not being an honest broker between enemies and friends. That's standing with friends. That's what Canada has done historically, other than the Liberal deviation under Pierre Trudeau and Jean Chrétien. I'm glad Harper started with Ukraine to remind people of the Cold War, but then he referred to the Middle East.
We're also standing with our allies against the threat posed by the terrorist group ISIL. Canadians are rightly sickened by ISIL's savage slaughter of anyone who doesn't share their twisted view of the world. We know their ideology is not the result of social exclusion or so-called root causes. It is evil, it is vile, and it must be unambiguously opposed. I know there continue to be those who question the wisdom of our policy, who, just as they once wished we would be more embracing of Putin, would now wish us to be more ambivalent about Israel, to go along and to get along with those who regularly single out Israel for criticism. Friends, that position is wrong. Israel is on the front line, and anyone among the free and democratic nations that turns their back on Israel or turns a blind eye to the nature of Israel's enemies does so in the long run at their own peril. And Canada will continue to stand by Israel through fire and water.
Harper was always strong on the Middle East from his first weeks in office when he rejected a call at the Francophonie Summit to only blame Israel for wars in the region and to only sympathize with Israel's enemies. It was shocking to the world's diplomats to hear a Canadian leader actually project Canadian values instead of just mimicking the moral pablum of the United Nations. It was shocking in Canada's own Foreign Affairs Department, which too often represents so-called world opinion to Canada rather than the other way around. Strong statements. It'll be interesting to see how the NDP and the Liberals respond. But Harper isn't the only one talking about heavy matters of war and terrorism. Yesterday, Justin Trudeau was on CTV's Question Period with Bob Fife. Fife didn't ask him about foreign policy, but about how foreign policy can reach right into Canada in the form of Muslim extremists here, both at mosques that propagate violent jihad and Canadian Muslims who travel overseas to join the Islamic State terrorists, as over 100 have done. Here, take a look.
Now, the Conservatives have gone after you for visiting a mosque in Montreal in 2011, frequented by an alleged extremist, and another mosque in the same city that gave thousands of dollars to a charity that has since been declared a terrorist entity. How do you respond to that? Because the Tories say basically you're pandering to extremists.
Well, I think, first of all, if there are any concerns about particular mosques, the Public Safety Minister, the Conservatives, should be stepping up on that and engaging with them, because the fight against radicalization is something that we have to be very, very aware of in this country. And I'd actually like to ask the Prime Minister and his Public Safety Minister, can he please give us a list of mosques that politicians shouldn't be visiting? It doesn't happen by promoting Islamophobia and attacking around the margins.
And now kudos to Fife for actually asking Trudeau about his visits to extremist mosques. I really haven't seen any of the other mainstream media do that before. But listen to Trudeau's answer. He implies that until the federal government shuts down a mosque, he'll keep campaigning there for votes. We'll take that Wahhabi mosque that Trudeau campaigned in Montreal. That's the one the Millennium Bomber frequented. Under Canadian law, you just can't shut a mosque down because someone visits there, even if he's a terrorist. It doesn't make any sense. If the mosque itself were a part of a terrorist group, I guess you could. There's a lot of room between being a healthy, moderate, Canadian values-embracing mosque the politicians should go to and a criminal terrorist organization like a biker gang with its biker gang headquarters. And that's the middle ground where this Wahhabi mosque sits. They preach anti-Semitism. They preach that adulterous women should be stoned to death. And same with gays. They preach that infidels, that's you and me, are condemned to death too. That's probably not criminal under the Canadian law. Other than human rights speech codes, which are never applied to Muslims. But in terms of real police criminal law, that Wahhabi mosque probably doesn't trip the wire. And Trudeau is saying basically, until they actually stone a woman on sight or build a dirty bomb in the mosque itself, he's going to keep campaigning there. Is there any other meaning to his answer? Well, Fife asked him another question about those Canadian Muslims who signed up for terrorist groups by the dozen and have gone overseas to commit murder over there. Good question. I mean, Trudeau goes to all their mosques. There's not a single mosque in Canada that I'm aware of that Trudeau will not attend, looking for votes. Here's what Trudeau answered.
I think one of the big things we need to continue doing, and we're already doing it reasonably well within our police services, within our security services, is engaging with the Muslim Canadian community. And we have to understand that it's a minor but very, very concerning development that we as a country need to engage with.
So Trudeau says the answer is to engage with these extremists. But he says it's a minor problem. Stop asking me about it, Bob. Really a minor problem. An estimated 150 Canadian Muslims have joined the Islamic State terrorist group. That's a minor problem, really? How many more are training here in Canada? I mean, we caught the Toronto 18 who were planning on blowing things up years ago. 13% of Canadian Muslims surveyed by Environics said that those would-be terrorists were either fully or somewhat justified in their terrorist plans. A minor problem, says Trudeau. But what's his answer to that minor problem? To engage extremists. But what does that mean? Engage them in what way? Trudeau engages mosques all the time, including extremist mosques. He engages them by asking them to vote for him. How does that fight extremism? If he were to engage them by telling them in Canada we treat gays and women and Jews and minorities as equals, that we don't believe in violence, if he were to engage them in that way, that would be quite something, quite laudable. He probably wouldn't sign up so many Liberal Party members in mosques then, so he doesn't engage them that way. He engages them with flattery. Here's what he told The Sun when we asked him about visiting that extremist Wahhabi mosque in Montreal. He said he was proud to visit them.
Job of a prime minister, the job of a leader of a political party, the job of an MP is to make sure that we're speaking for all Canadians and listening to everyone's concerns. And I'm proud of getting out to meet with as many different people as I possibly can, because they're all Canadians.
So that's how you tackle the extremists. You visit them proudly, without a harsh or corrective word for them. Trudeau loves saying the word engage. It's blather, it's meaningless really, but it's so Trudeau, isn't it? A buzzword that sort of blurs things and you forget what you were saying and the moment passes. Here, listen to him tell Fife and our reporter how much he loves engaging extremists.
The Conservatives should be stepping up on that and engaging with them. My focus remains on, engaging with Canadians, engaging with the Muslim Canadian community, leadership and imam, community leaders, making sure we're engaging positively, sharing and stressing Canadian values.
It's blather. It doesn't say anything. It's not a real-life answer. It's a first-year political science student's answer, not the answer of a man who would be prime minister. But that mindless engage blather is positively Churchillian compared to what else Trudeau has to say about foreign affairs. After the break, I'll prove that to you. So Stephen Harper has outlined a traditional conservative foreign policy, really the same that Canada followed in the First and Second World Wars and in Korea, really all of our history, except for when Pierre Trudeau thought he'd legitimize dictators like Fidel Castro in the height of the Cold War. And Trudeau, well, he really doesn't know what to say, so he says he wants to hug everyone.
The Conservatives should be stepping up on that and engaging with them. My focus remains on, engaging with Canadians, engaging with the Muslim Canadian community, leadership and imam, community leaders, making sure we're engaging positively, sharing and stressing Canadian values.
Look, it's just not Trudeau himself. Here's one of his MPs, Ted Hsu. He saw Harper's speech and then he tweeted this. Conservative MP calls world dark and dangerous in member statements today. Libs see a light and beauty in the potential of every person. So they're talking about terrorism in Parliament and beheadings. And the Liberals see through all that to the inner beauty of the terrorists? Seriously? If you think I'm misinterpreting Hsu, here's his follow-up tweet when he was mocked by someone for implying that the terrorist beheader really had a heart of gold. Here's what Hsu followed up with. He said, and that guy has the potential of realizing and telling everybody that what he did was wrong. I swear to God, that is really what a Liberal MP said. That's why Trudeau's engage blather is actually better. When you've got nothing smart to say, just keep saying engage, engage. It's really been Trudeau's stock in trade for years. Here, I'm going to be mean to you for a moment. I apologize. I'm going to play to you a full minute of a speech that Trudeau gave a couple of years ago to a literacy charity in Saskatoon. He charged $20,000 for this blather. I swear it's like getting sedation right into your veins. Listen and try to wake up in 60 seconds when I'm back.
So we need to be preventative. We need to proact in ways we've gotten away with as a species for never having done before. So there are fundamental rethinkings of the rules of the game in our society. As Einstein once said, the problems we have created for ourselves cannot be solved at the level of thinking that created them. So where then is this fresh level of thinking going to come from? How do we get this shock to the system that challenges the status quo? It challenges the way things have always been done. How do we look beyond our habits and be bold about the future? Well, for me, it's about making sure we pay attention to our young people.
I swear to God, he quoted Albert Einstein. That trust fund kid was booked as a speaker because of his last name and his supermodel good looks. But he thinks he was booked for his deep thoughts. And if you got paid $20,000 to blather on like he just did, wouldn't you think you were smart too? Look, that's fine on the cougar circuit of undersexed school teachers. But what about when you're dealing with Vladimir Putin or the Islamic State? Will they be wowed and wooed by your beautiful hair too? Or by blather like this? We have to realize that the way of thinking that got us to this place, it no longer holds. We have to rethink elements as basic as space and time to get all science fictioning on you in this sense. Dude, sorry, that was the wrong clip. That was me reading a Trudeau speech. Here, let him say it himself.
We have to realize that the way of thinking that got us to this place no longer holds. We have to rethink elements as basic as space and time to go all science fiction-y on you in this sense.
What? He reminds me of The Onion. You ever go to that website? They did a satire of deep thinkers at those deep thinkers conferences like this guy.
Step 1. Devise an idea to create a car that runs on compost. Step 2. Create the car. We've already completed step 1. We're halfway there. We just need people to do those things. Imagine what other groundbreaking ideas I could be thinking of. Behind every great achievement is a visionary. I'll be your visionary, and you do the things I come up with. Thank you.
That's Justin Trudeau and Ted Hsu, his happy MP. They will fix this terrorism thing and this big, mean Putin thing by engagement, and then someone else just needs to implement it. And then, ta-da, world peace. But look, whenever Trudeau says something other than engage with more engagement, he gets into trouble. Remember when he said this about terrorism?
It's only a couple of hours after something has happened that clearly was not an accident in Boston. People have died, many people are injured. You're the Canadian Prime Minister. What do you do?
We have to look at the root causes. Now, we don't know now whether it was terrorism or a single crazy or a domestic issue or a foreign issue. I mean, all those questions. But there is no question that this happened because there is someone who feels completely excluded, completely at war with innocence, at war with a society. And our approach has to be, okay, where do those tensions come from?
Yeah, we've excluded them, so we caused the tensions. If we just engaged those poor terrorists with engagement, their hearts of gold would shine through. Or listen to him on Vladimir Putin.
Croyez-vous que la politique du gouvernement canadien, donc conservateur, est appropriée? Est-ce que le Canada pourrait en faire plus?
Le Canada devrait en faire plus. Ça fait plusieurs semaines qu'on est en train d'essayer d'encourager le gouvernement de prendre un leadership pour l'imposition de sanctions personnelles contre le président et ses alliés. Pour moi, le président Yanukovych est rendu illégitime. Et c'est très inquiétant, surtout puisque la Russie a perdu au hockey. Ils vont être de mauvaise humeur. On craint l'implication russe en Ukraine. Non?
Juste à cause du hockey?
Non. C'est d'essayer d'amener une optique un peu légère dans une situation qui est extrêmement sérieuse,
Oui,
extrêmement troublante.
On pense que ça peut dégénérer en massacre, en fait, c'est commencé. Là.
Ah oui, non, c'est horrible la violence qui se passe.
Look, Stephen Harper knows a lot about hockey too. He's actually obsessed by it. He wrote a book about it. But he knows that when you talk about Vladimir Putin and war, that's not the time to reach for a hockey joke because you have no clue what else to say to fill the time. Or how about another dictatorship? China.
Taking it up to a global scale, Which nation, besides Canada, which nation's administration do you most admire and why? Not the fluffy questions some were expecting.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China, because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime and say we need to go green as fast as we need to start investing in solar.
He actually says he loves their basic dictatorship, just like his dad did. Justin Trudeau is a playboy who spent the first 40 years of his life partying while living off his inheritance. He partied in the party town of Whistler, BC. He worked for a bit as a substitute teacher in BC, then he got bored and quit. He started taking some courses in environmentalism, but he got bored and quit. So he partied. He hit all the best nightclubs in the world, literally in the world. Remember what he told that Iranian-Canadian newspaper? Listen.
About Iran, you never been to Iran?
Not yet, no, not yet. I've been to about 90 different countries.
Seriously, he has partied as a tourist in 90 countries. Can you even name 90 countries? Trudeau has traveled there to partay. By the way, that bizarre boast was made when he was asked about his foreign policy expertise. He knows where to party. But look, let me give the guy a chance to show what he means by engaging in engagement. I've mocked it. I've said it's a filler word just to wriggle out of a tough question, just to make it seem like he has a clue when he has none. What does Justin Trudeau look like and sound like when he's trying to engage with engagement? Not just selling Liberal Party memberships, when he's sharing his ideas with a group that includes Muslim extremists. Well, let's hear from Trudeau himself. Remember when he was invited to speak at a big Muslim conference in Toronto that was co-sponsored by a group that the Canadian government says funneled money to terrorists overseas? When that terrorist link was exposed, Trudeau refused to quit the event. Seriously. Another speaker at that same event was Imam Bilal Philips, listed by the U.S. as an unindicted co-conspirator in the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center. We've talked about that Muslim imam before on this show. He says Islam requires gays to be killed. That's what he preaches. Oh, and he gets around. Literally last week, Phillips was arrested in the Philippines, accused by their government of inciting violent jihad. So that's who else was at Trudeau's big engagement event. Here, take a listen to Imam Bilal Philips telling The Sun what he thinks about gays and women.
I am not informing anybody of what they don't know. You know, any Muslim, if you take any Muslim off the street and you ask him about adultery and homosexuality, he's clear. He knows it's forbidden. He knows it's punishable in Islamic law with the death penalty.
Yeah.
This is not something new.
So let's give Imam Bilal Philips the benefit of the doubt and accept that the Philippine police got it all wrong. He's not a terrorist. No, never. Let's accept what he told us willingly, that he just hates gays and believes they should be killed. That's what he thinks. And Trudeau runs in the same circles as him, speaks at the same events as him. So how does Trudeau engage with people like that? What does his engagement look like?
The Conservatives should be stepping up on that and engaging with them. My focus remains on, engaging with Canadians, engaging with the Muslim Canadian community, leadership, and imam, community leaders, making sure we're engaging positively, sharing and stressing Canadian values.
Okay, so what does all that engagement look like? Well, take a listen. This is from the very speech that Trudeau gave to the thousands of Muslims at that event in Toronto.
One that has now moved beyond the goal of mere tolerance. Because saying, I tolerate you, is to grudgingly allow you to breathe the same air, to walk the same earth. And while there are still many places in the world where tolerance is still a far-off dream, in Canada, we are beyond that. So let us not use the word tolerance. Let us speak instead of acceptance, understanding, respect, and friendship.
So Justin Trudeau, who never misses a photo op at a gay pride parade, who loves to consider himself a feminist, when he is in a room with people who want to kill gays, what does he say? How does he engage? He doesn't tell them to reform themselves, to become more like us. He doesn't tell them to liberalize, to Canadianize. He doesn't tell them that they have to give up the more medieval practices of their home countries like Iran or Pakistan. He says the opposite, that we Canadians are the ones who have to adapt, who have to change. We have to accept their views on issues. That's what he means by engaging. For most Canadians, the next election will be fought on the economy, jobs, taxes, the middle class, things like that. But for millions of us, foreign policy is important, not just for our own safety and security and that of our allies, but because it reflects our own Canadian values abroad. Justin Trudeau doesn't want to push our Canadian values on others. Like his MP, Ted Hsu, he thinks those terrorists are just misunderstood, excluded by us. If we just engage them, they'll see the light. But he wants to engage foreign enemies the same way he wants to engage our enemies within, the enemies in Canada, those who believe in violence right here at home. To Justin Trudeau, engaging our enemies means that we have to accept them and their values. I can't think of a starker contrast that voters will have next year.